Hi, I'm Don. Today we have another workshop format video. A workshop format video means it's at least 20 minutes long and I'll be talking a lot. We'll talk about thinning paints, why there's fat brushes and detail brushes, why contrast paints are popular, and fluorescent paints. So today we're painting this Mammoth Factory 3D printed miniature model and turn it into this.
Hi, I'm Don. Welcome to my studio.
This channel is supported by all these awesome brands. Now let's paint and talk. I took miniature painting a bit more seriously last year, maybe exactly last year or around May last year. I tried and experimented with different painting techniques, but one thing is for sure, I hate watering down paints. Watering down paints to almost like wash consistency or at the very least around 2 parts or 1 part paint and 1 part water is not for me. Of course, I'm not saying watering down your paints into roughly 1:1 or even more is wrong because master painters have been doing it for ages. However, for people like me or just trying to improve their painting or are just starting out with painting 3D printed or other miniatures, it's really frustrating to paint with 1:1 ratio or very watered down paints. You'll notice in this video that the emerald paint, it's either I did not shake it enough or it's just thinner than the olive green or the lime green, but this is one of the reasons why you shouldn't over thin or water down your paints too much because some paints are semi-transparent already. The semi-transparency of other colors or other paints can be a strength because you can build up smooth transitions and gradations because you're painting with semi-transparent paints. However, if you water down these paints further, you'll be pushing and pulling pigments floating on top of water. I mean, some master painters call it pushing and pulling of pigments. Basically, the pigments are just floating on top of like a pool of water. That's why you kind of push and pull it to the direction or the area that you want it to settle, and it's kind of difficult to control. Again, I'm not saying the watered down technique is wrong, but for me, since I'm a watercolor artist since I was 12 years old, that's 30 years ago, and it's kind of frustrating. It's like painting watercolor paints on top of plastic. And plastic is not paper, so you don't get to blend it as well as watercolor on paper. Also, acrylics, although they're versatile enough to act like watercolors, acrylics at the end of the day are not watercolors. As you can see in the video, painting the base colors is super easy. You could be sloppy with it as long as you thin your paints just a little bit so that they are not so runny and they adhere to the plastic or the prime miniature really well. If you like ratios, I think my ratio is around roughly 3 parts paint to 1 part thinner or water or medium. Now we paint with carmine red. This is a nice purplish pinkish color, and normally I use dark vermilion for reds, but I wanted to try a different color or paint because it's kind of boring using the same paints over and over again. Carmine red, much like emerald earlier in the video, is a bit more transparent than the other paints. It has less coverage, but the color is really vibrant, so I like it. Also, you could take advantage of paints with less coverage like the carmine red and now the wern red and build up like thin layers. Around a couple of thin coats will do, and do not over thin them at all. So you use those transparency to your advantage and build up thin layers and create nice transitions. Oh, by the way, if you're a long-time subscriber, normally I thin down my paints with thinner medium or even glaze medium, but with this one I just want to keep it basic because, well, it's a new wet palette and just wanted to try it with just basic water and paints. Now we move on to painting highlights. This part of the video will talk about fat brushes and detail brushes, and of course my highlight sauce. While painting this miniature, a couple of packages arrived. My Frontier Wargaming desktop paint organizers just arrived and they're awesome. Also, I've been waiting for this since last month and my Red Grass Wet Palette B2 just arrived. So I can't help it but to switch wet palettes. Now we talk about my highlight sauce. My highlight sauce is $100 at my website. It's a good value at 30 ml, so do check it out. Just kidding, guys. The highlight sauce is just watered down Vallejo retarder medium. I saw a few painters using the flow improver as thinning agent for their paints for brush painting. That ain't working. The Vallejo Flow Improver was formulated to aid with airbrushing. It's basically water, a bit of alcohol, and retarder medium. But the retarding property of the Flow Improver is not enough for brush painting. Flow Improver basically, since it has alcohol, so it kinda like counteracts with the slow retarding agent, and alcohol speeds up drying time, so it kind of counters that property. It's only perfect for airbrushing because it retards the drying time for just a few seconds, just enough so that you don't get too much tip drying and so that the paint particles coming from the airbrush will hit like the surface of the miniature or the model while it's still wet. So it just retards the drying time enough to travel from the airbrush to the surface of the model. So my $100 highlight sauce works a ton way better than using Flow Improver to thin down your paints. The highlight sauce is especially good if you like using small detail brush for painting highlights, edge highlights, and details of miniatures. Our thinning sauce will simply keep like the detail brush wet while you're painting those details, and since it has retarding properties, the drying time is lower for like around maybe a minute, and the brush won't dry up on you. Also, the consistency of your paints will remain more consistent far longer than just using water. Now let's talk about big brushes and detail brushes for painting highlights and details. You can see in my video that I'm using mostly my number 2 red grass brush, which is really big and fat but has a really nice point. However, it is important to note that the red grass brushes are Kulinsky brushes. They are natural sable brushes, and as long as you clean them during painting, you rinse them well with water while you're painting. Also, you clean it up after painting. You kinda making sure taking care of Kulinsky brushes, it will last for years and it's easier to maintain that very fine point. The main advantage of using this fat brush with a fine point is that this will last you years and it's easy to maintain because the fat part of the brush has like water in it, meaning it will keep like it has moisture and it will keep your paints a bit more wet longer, especially if you're using our highlight sauce. Also, letting the paints travel through the ferrule, the metal part of the brushes, will slowly damage your brushes. So, using a big fat brush will help you from doing that because you're just using the tip to carry the paints and you have like water in the middle which will protect the ferrule from the paints. However, it takes a bit more focus and maybe experience or practice to use a fat brush with a fine tip to use as detail painting or highlight painting or edge highlight painting. Because it's kind of fat and if you apply too much pressure, you'll end up with really wide or big strokes. Thus, enter the detail brush. At some point in this video, I'll be switching to my detail brush. Again, it's still red grass. It's double zero size red grass Kulinski brush. And I'll switch to it while I'm painting the extreme highlights. I think I'm using ivory and really bright highlights like that to paint the edge highlights with the detail brush. The main advantage of using fine detail brush is that even if you lose focus or you like accidentally applied a heavier pressure with the brush while you're applying the paint, you won't end up with super big strokes of paint because you're using a small brush. Less focus or less concentration while painting if you're using a detail brush for painting details is, well, it means it's more relaxing and you're enjoying the painting a ton more. However, you can see here I'm contradicting myself because I'm still using the number 2 red grass brush for detail painting. However, it takes a bit of practice or getting used to using a fat brush for painting details and edge highlights. But once you get the hang of it, it's really fun, it's easy, you don't really need to focus as much. But then again, do you need the detail brush? Yes, it's advantageous to use a detail brush. I highly recommend you use our highlight sauce to keep it wet and like moist. Moist, is that the right word? And also, don't let the paints go all the way to the ferrule and use it with nice pressure, with light pressure, and you'll create really fine details and strokes. Point being, you don't need a lot of brushes, just buy the red grass brushes. Now we add some tufts. I did not detail paint the base, I just wanted to add tufts. I did not record it on video, it's just basic stuff. Now we talk about fluorescent glazing and why contrast paints are so popular. I have a ton of videos on glazing miniatures. I use mainly Vallejo mediums, inks, and transparent paints to do glazing, but today we're using fluorescent paints. First, why are contrast paints so popular? I'm not sure. It's a mixture of inks and paints mixed together so that you have the right amount of transparency, vibrancy, and very easy to apply on miniatures. So even though the contrast paints and other paint brands who created really nice speed paints are good, I'm afraid I will never have it on this channel because Vallejo has been supporting me for 10 years now and I'm too loyal to do that, or at the very least show you that I'm using other brands. So back to fluorescent paints. But basically, glazing with Vallejo transparent paints and Vallejo inks are awesome because they're naturally transparent and you don't have to water it down or even add mediums because they're really transparent already and the coverages are good and they're very vibrant, but there are no paints more vibrant than the fluorescent paints. It takes around 4 coats or even 6 or 7 or 8 coats of fluorescent paints before you get a full coverage, which is great. It means that it takes so much effort to get the full coverage out of these fluorescent paints, so you will never cover up your previous painting. So why is using fluorescent paints better than using washes or even contrast paints or even inks my favorite? Is that it's doing two things here to our miniature. One is that the fluorescent paints is naturally glazing and blending our rough layering. And unlike washes, glazes, or contrast paints or even inks, it does not darken your miniature. So much like washes, contrast paints, and inks, you can see in the video that our fluorescent paints is blending our layering really well. Of course, you could simply use the paints that you use for the base colors, water them down or mix with mediums and use it for glazing. But it's easier to use glaze paints and fluorescent paints because you don't need to water them down, they are naturally transparent. This is one of the reasons why contrast paints are so popular because they have good coverage but they remain transparent, sort of transparent in a few coats, and thus they're very famous because they're very easy to use. Don't get me wrong, I don't hate contrast paints or speed paints. It's just that I'm too loyal to Vallejo and also I have so many options as a Vallejo painter to get myself to buy like other paint brands, but I might get a couple of like bottles so that I have a good comparison and I will experiment with it off camera. Now we paint recess and add more contrast to our miniature by also using fluorescent paint. If you've seen my other videos, especially videos that are talking about the color wheel, I've said that blue is the ultimate shadow color. Blue is the only cool primary color, so all of the so-called like cool colors are just colors mixed with a bit of blue. So using semi-transparent fluorescent blue is a very good option for painting the recesses and deep crevices of the details of your miniature, as it is a very good option as a shadow color. The fluorescent blue turns a bit purplish over the reds and it turns a bit more emerald colored or like turquoise color over the greens. So using fluorescent paints does not only add contrast or even make your miniatures darker like washes and inks, but it also adds nice nuances to your model because it adds different colors to your model. It gives it more color depth. Also, using fluorescent paints will make your model, the whole overall look of your model, look more vibrant. So flow paints blends your previous layering really well. It gives more contrast and it makes your models pop. That's it, Pansit. So we just need to like give it a nice thin coat of matte varnish. I'm using Mecha Matte Varnish because it's the most durable varnish that Vallejo has and it's really nice and matte. Now I present to you a Golden Lemon Mammoth Factory miniature. I hope you like this format, I mean the workshop format, although I talked a lot and it's not easy to do. Talking a lot takes a toll on me because English is not my native language. I'm Filipino and English is just my secondary language. So it's kinda like really hard to explain stuff in English, to be honest, but I hope you like the video. So don't get me wrong. I hope you don't get me wrong. I don't hate contrast paints. I think there's new contrast paints and there are some really good speed paints out there, but I'm just too loyal to Vallejo. Do leave comments or feedbacks below, guys, because it helps me improve the quality of my videos.
That's it, we're done. I hope you liked the video. Do like, comment, subscribe, and consider joining the channel so that you'll be part of our Discord community. Saludos!